you. Hello.
Hi Laura, thank you so much for that intro. Actually, it's just me today, but I do have a recording with Maha and with Claire because we had to record it on a different time, and it's actually Maha's birthday today, so she's unavailable right now, but yes.
Happy birthday, Maha.
Yes, happy birthday. So, did you want me to just get started?
Yeah, floor is all yours.
Awesome. So in a few minutes, I'll just be showing you recording, and then afterwards you can ask as many questions as you'd like. And there's a few little things that Claire mentions that we can all kind of do. But yes, so this is Clare Press, founder of the Wardrobe Crisis, international speaker and passionate advocate for the circular economy. The list of incredible initiatives does not end, trust me. Claire uses her platforms to push for a more responsible fashion future, but also gives rise to such incredible people and their voices. Each week, host Clare Press interviews designers, change makers, academics, creatives, and fashion insiders about fashion, ethics, social justice, and environmental sustainability. We are so excited to have the chance to speak and interview Claire for the World Oceans Day and the initiation of our new podcast series, The Green Style, where we talk about sustainable fashion designers and change makers, all things fashion and ocean. Claire is so incredibly inspiring and a warrior of change, a true embodiment of the quote, each one teach one, as she gives rise to others. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy. I will share my screen in a second. Sorry, could you hear the video?
It seems to be muted on my end.
Okay.
Is your computer audio up and running?
It should be, yeah. Just give me a second. Could you hear this now?
I am not getting anything.
Okay, give me a second. I'll just pause it.
So you have your headphones on. Are those Bluetooth or are those like plugged in?
They're connected through a wire. Maybe I'll just take...
Try to unplug them. That seems to have been an issue before, and that's worked.
Perfect. Sorry. Okay. Okay, let's try that again. These super surreal times.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm well, and thank you for asking. I do
Can you hear that now?
Yeah, we're all good.
Awesome. Perfect. Claire, firstly, how are you? And how are you feeling amongst these super surreal times?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm well, and thank you for asking. I do recognize that these are incredibly difficult times for so many people in our communities and elsewhere. I mean, in purely just looking at fashion, I'm seeing so many of my friends going through really difficult times, particularly in America. But I also think that this is a moment, not just with the situation unfolding around Black Lives Matter, but also with the coronavirus. I think that actually this is a moment that we can harness for positive change. From this, we can actually pivot and start to really center the things that matter, which are justice, not just social justice, but also climate justice and justice for nature. And I think that I can see those things really bubbling up and underpinning a lot of these conversations now. And hopefully we're going to use this moment to really reconstruct society in a way that is just a lot more equitable and a lot more just. And I really hope that we can keep our eye on nature in these discussions and not let that take a back seat, because I think I've been seeing it with coronavirus that obviously people are dealing with economic shocks and short term, maybe the bandwidth to think about climate or nature or the oceans feels like it's shrinking, but I think we need to keep our eye on it because it's all connected. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, totally. It's been a very, very interesting place. I remember the beginning of the coronavirus, talking amongst my friend groups, we're concerned, is this a good thing? Is this a moment for us where we can still keep pushing, or is this something where it falls to the background?
Yeah, we need to keep pushing. We need to keep the pressure on and recognize with empathy that people are suffering and that this is a difficult time, but also that these issues don't go away. Issues around protecting our environment don't disappear because there are more pressing issues right now. So I just hope that we can keep the positivity up and keep these conversations connected, because that's the whole thing. That's all the work that I do. It's like recognizing that these issues do not exist in isolation. And it's between my particular kind of area, which is fashion, but also all the impacts that it has and the system has on people and on planet. So yeah, I send my love to everyone at this really difficult time, and I just hope that we can be really empathetic with one another, but also keep the pressure on to make sure that we look after nature and keep that conversation going.
Yeah, and I think on that point as well, when I was talking with my friends about coronavirus and how people are, I guess, linking it to climate change and everything, and people are kind of describing it as like a detox for the planet as coronavirus. But I've kind of had different views on that, because I think we're kind of being a bit blindsided, and we're like, oh, because nobody's going out, that means the planet's getting better. But I think what people have to realize is that this is only very short term, and that these issues of, the environmental issues with the fast fashion industry and other fossil fuel businesses, that's going to continue occurring once coronavirus is deemed as not really that much of an issue anymore. So I think that's something that people really have to remind themselves, instead of just saying, oh, coronavirus is a detox for the planet, therefore it must be good for the planet that we're having this.
But it is interesting because we have seen, in some cases, it's quite delightful to see nature taking space back. I mean, I was reading a story in the New York Times just the other day, which was about elephants that are now finding they can walk down this road that had been placed on their path. Like, they built this road on their path down to a river, and so the elephants were pushed off the path by all the tourists and all the traffic. But now that there's no one there, they've reclaimed the space. And I think that, I don't know, sometimes we need those little uplifting moments where we can see whether it's dolphins in the port in Sardinia or more birds in the park or whatever it is, that it reminds us that once we get out of the way, nature can come forward.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I guess that sort of brings me on to my next question is, when and why did fashion sustainability and sustainability first become important to you?
Right, thank you. So I worked in fashion as a journalist for many years, and around the time of the Rana Plaza factory disaster that happened in Bangladesh in April of 2013, around that time I'd also been making a lot more connections with the impacts that the industry that is my professional home was having on nature and on the planet. And those two things really came together quite forcibly for me over that experience with Rana Plaza. So it was like I was watching the news and I was seeing these devastating images of loss of life and absolute just devastation of a whole community of garment workers who were mostly women, mostly young women, who had been basically, catastrophically impacted by this industry that I worked on. And I think that anyone who was around then would remember those news reports and seeing the kind of harrowing pictures of what was happening. And I'm going to say on the other side of the world, which is the problem. So the other side of the world is a terrible phrase. The other side from whom? We need to really remember that we have to shift our lenses to recognize that wherever it is that we see this from is only our perspective. But that thing about distance, it really hit home with fashion, because fashion is mostly produced in countries in which it is not consumed on the same level, right? So we're making all these clothes globally, but we're chasing the cheapest needle. So we're making them in low-cost countries where people are basically most often not paid a living wage and often exploited. And they're not the people who are enjoying the benefits of all these lovely clothes. And this kind of whole system thing just really hit home to me. I was at the time writing for magazines and writing about trends and glamour and
Hey, Nicola, I think if you mute yourself, it mutes the video as well.
Oh, really? Okay. Sorry about that.
You're all good.
I spoke about and wrote about fashion. And so that was about 7 years ago. And in the last maybe sort of 4 or 5 years, I've really stepped that up. So now I only write and talk about sustainability in fashion. And so what I'm trying to do is not tell everyone that fashion's terrible, because I still think it's got so much power and it can be so much fun and we all love lovely clothes. I mean, today I was like, oh, I'll wear something with a wave pattern on because it's the oceans. Like, fashion can be really a great tool for talking and it can be super fun. And I want to maintain that side of it and keep the joy. But I also want to shine a light on the bad stuff that fashion can do when it comes to people and planet. And the other side is, so I mentioned Rana Plaza. If people want to look into that, I would suggest you check out Fashion Revolution, which is a consumer-led campaign, just raising awareness on who makes our clothes. And, you know, gloomy, but we should look at these facts head on. 1,138 people lost their lives in that factory collapse that happened in 2013. And we continue to have factory disasters and terrible things that happen, albeit on a smaller scale. So that side of it, we need to look at, but we also need to look at what fashion can do to the planet. And we're here talking about the oceans. There are actually connections, and we'll get onto them specifically with fashion and the oceans, but fashion can also be really polluting to soil, to fresh water. I don't know if anyone's ever even made the connection with forests. Do you guys know about that?
Not directly, but you can definitely understand the impacts that it would have on forests and,
well, it's not
and
just
clearing.
Yeah, so it's clear. It's using trees for fabric, and not everybody knows that. So it's interesting when you ask people, what are your clothes made of? Maybe we should ask the audience. Like, if you're watching this now, just think quickly, what do you think your clothes are made from? And I bet you that the first thing you might think is cotton. You might think polyester, so synthetics. But not very many people think about viscose, which is also a huge part of the fiber basket, we call it. But viscose comes from trees, and some of it comes from bamboo or other kinds of fibrous plants that have either been, we can use waste or produced specifically. But some of it comes from trees that are just, you know, we're clearing land in order to plant fast-growing bamboo, but we're also clearing old growth and endangered forests and using the trees to make viscose. Crazy times. So if you want to look into that, there's an NGO called Canopy Planet that sheds light on that. But so everywhere you look, fashion is using natural resources. And sometimes it's also abusing them. And often it's also polluting. So polluting soil, polluting water, and polluting ocean with plastic microfibers. So there's a lot of stuff behind this, and it's really complex, but there's also a lot of good stuff. So there's a lot of alternatives that we can use. And so it's not about losing hope and feeling like, we can't have any fashion. It's just about looking into the kind of shadows and seeing what some of the bad impacts are, and then demanding better and supporting the good. What are you wearing? I always like to ask, because often people don't even know. So do you both, like Nicola, tell me, do you know what your shirt is made from without looking at the label?
I do. I think it's mostly...
Or jumper.
It is a jumper. It's mostly cotton, but there is polyester in it.
Yep. People come and have that blend. Like, that's really, so 70% of our garments are made from synthetics.
Yeah.
If you look at all clothing production, that's more than 2/3 are made from polyester or nylon or acrylic or blended. Yeah. What about you, Maya? What do you know what you're wearing?
So this jacket, this is actually from an ethical fashion business called Koto. I don't know.
Oh, it's good.
Yeah. So I did this campaign thing with them last year, and they gifted me this jacket, and I'm pretty sure it's 100% organic cotton. So that's cool. And I'm unsure about the scarf. It was gifted to me. It doesn't really have any labels on it. It's from Pakistan, so I'm guessing that it was weaved with like cotton or something.
Okay. But yeah, it's funny. People often don't know what their clothes are made from. And when you ask people, they kind of go, oh, I hadn't thought about it. Or they might be able to look at the care label in a garment and it will tell you what the fabric content is. But it doesn't tell you very much else. It might tell you where it was made, but it's not going to tell you, for example, what chemicals were used in the dyes, or where the fabric itself was made. It'll tell you where the garment was cut and sewn. That's normally what we mean when we say country of origin. So there's so much that we don't get told about clothes. And I think, anyway, I'm going off track, but I do think the exciting bit about sustainability and about sustainable fashion is it's all about learning more, and it's empowering when you know more, and it gets exciting instead of being kind of confusing or depressing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And like, I only became aware about the ethical fashion movement and the harms of the fast fashion industry in year 12, which was like 2 years ago, because I was a textile student for 4 years. And it wasn't until the 4th year in high school did we actually start looking at it. And
but how brilliant that you did start looking at it, because in my schooling, we would never have learned this stuff. This was not something on school curriculums, absolutely not. So it's really changed. So I feel like that's amazing.
Yeah, it was very insightful. We watched like the True Cost and did this upcycling project and stuff, and that was very eye-opening for me as well. But I guess moving on to the next question that we have, and I think you've touched on it as well, is what prompted the fruition of the wardrobe crisis?
Okay, so I wrote this book. It's called Wardrobe Crisis: How We Went from Sunday Best to Fast Fashion. And that subtitle is the secret to the narrative, I guess. So Sunday best, I don't even know if people know what that phrase is anymore, but it was about, I mean, think about when you watch a costume drama on the TV and it's set in the 50s. I don't know. But back in the day, Sunday best was your best outfit that you would wear to an occasion, whether, I don't know, like going to church or going to a birthday party or getting dressed up to be respectful, because you didn't have loads of clothes. You had your Sunday best, and then you had what you wore to work or to school or whatever it was. Now, somewhere along the line, that's changed enormously. Now, fast fashion means that people have literally hundreds of garments in their wardrobe, and that's normal. That doesn't mean that you're a crazy hoarder. I mean, actually, an experiment, if you guys want to do it, after this, go and have a look in your closet and count how many items that you own. Shoes, t-shirts, dresses, jeans, count it. Because you might be listening and saying or watching and thinking, no, I'm not into this. I'm not a wasteful fashionista. But I bet you've got more clothes than you normally wear. We don't really know because the stats aren't there. I mean, you can look at different studies, but there tends to be like 100 people that they've looked at. But we think that the average garment is worn, I feel like it's up to 7 times before it's discarded. But again, these are kind of sketchy figures. I've certainly read about women wearing less than 40% of what's in their wardrobe, which means that 60% is just stuck in the back and no one's thinking about it. So this idea of from Sunday best to fast fashion, we used to have a small amount of clothes. We used to be a lot more aware of where they'd been made and how. We used to take care of them more because they were more expensive. We used to be taught by our families and at school how to mend them and look after them and care for them. But in the last it's a while, I mean, I'm going to say 20 years, so at the beginning of the 2000s, fast fashion came along and it made clothes super cheap and really accessible. So instead of having to save up and think about carefully acquiring something that you were going to get a lot of wear out of and appreciate, you could go out and buy clothes for the equivalent cost of buying your lunch. And you mentioned The True Cost, which is a fantastic film that came out in 2015. It's on Netflix if you've got Netflix. You can also go to their website and organize screenings if you want to do screenings with your friends. But this is a film that tells a story of fast fashion and how it came about and exploits people and planet. But basically what we're talking about is the speed with which the clothes can come from the design room to the shop. And it's so quick. It used to be a few months. Now it's like literally a few days. You can look at a trend, if you like, something that you see on the Hollywood red carpet or in a film or on a runway. You can then knock it off, copy it, and then get it onto the shop floor in a fast fashion shop. And we're thinking about brands like Zara or Forever 21 or take your pick, H&M, Topshop, but also maybe smaller local ones that aren't necessarily household names but are still rushing this stuff out. Or online, if you think about Fashion Nova, they can look at Kim Kardashian on Instagram and get clothes copied and delivered within a day in LA. That's crazy. So the speed, that's what fast fashion means, has then been combined with price. And so we always talk about someone pays the price for too cheap. If you're buying something that costs $10, who do you think paid the cost for that? And that's where it gets really interesting, because it could be, and most certainly will have been, the garment worker who's being exploited. So here's a stat for you. In Australia, the average, looking at a t-shirt, an average t-shirt on the high street, 4% of the retail price of that t-shirt goes to the garment worker. So not very much, right? But who else pays, and this is the bit that I don't think people really make the connection with so readily, who else pays the cost of too cheap? It's the environment. So we're producing all this stuff really cheaply. We're not using the best practices because they're more expensive. And then we're chucking it out. I mean, there's a crazy stat. We are apparently globally, according to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, throwing away 1 garbage truck load of clothing into landfill. Guess how much? How often? Go on, guess.
Oh my gosh.
Every week?
Maybe a day?
I love that you said a day, and I was thinking, and I had to double check it because I always can't believe the truth. I thought, is it a minute? It's a second. So every second,
No way.
whole garbage truckloads of clothes ends up in landfill somewhere around the world. This is completely bananas. So this book that I wrote tried to explain how we got there and what happened to get us there, and then tries to present some solutions on how we can change it. And I now also make a podcast, which I know you've listened to, thank you, which I do every week, which is based on this stuff. What we need is a massive system change where we have better regulation, where we change culture so we expect a different kind of product, and we retrain people to understand what cost is. Because at the moment, if I said to you, would you like to buy this shirt for $20, or this one that kind of looks the same but has been kinder to the environment for 3 times more when you can't afford it, what are you going to choose?
Obviously the cheap
Yeah. So it's a really difficult, it's a complicated situation we've gotten ourselves into. But I also think the kind of push towards changing it is pretty big. So I think your generation wants a different outcome.
Yeah, and I think historically when it comes to system change, it's taken masses of people to come together to make that system change happen. And the fast fashion industry in itself is huge, and we're going to need a lot of people who want to see that change for it to actually change to be more better for their workers and more better for the environment. And that leads me to ask you, what inspires you the most about the ethical fashion movement?
Well, that it is a movement, that it used to be a really niche conversation. Even when I started doing this, there was not much noise in fashion. There were certainly journalists at newspapers and investigative reporters on the nightly news or wherever looking into this stuff, but we didn't have a broad conversation where people who just liked clothes were talking about this, and now we do. And now we also have a lot more information and the ability to get more information. I mentioned Fashion Revolution, which is just a super cool not-for-profit campaign where you can access so much information for free on the website. There's loads of other NGOs that are really putting out information. So it's much, much easier now to Google and find this stuff out than it was even sort of 3 or 4 years ago, I think. So I'm excited that there's more interest. I'm excited that there's more progress because we are actually seeing change. I'll give you an example. I did a podcast recently with these fantastic people behind a campaign called Pay Up. So when coronavirus happened, you might have seen this story in the news. Garment workers, it started in Bangladesh, but it's prevalent all over the place. But the story broke in Bangladesh, which is the second biggest garment producing country after China. There's 4.1 million garment workers in Bangladesh, and it is a low cost producing country. So often people are not paid high wages. When coronavirus happened, all these big brands, they cancelled their orders. Now you might say, well, of course they did. They had to close their shops. People weren't shopping. However, these orders were not just on the way or at the start. They were either finished or partially completed. So that means the factories had to pay for the fabric already. and they had to pay the garment workers already, and then they were ready to ship, or in some cases had already shipped this stuff, and the brands were like, sorry, we don't want it, we're not taking responsibility, we can't afford it, even though some of these brands are billion dollar brands. And what that meant was that the garment workers, of course, at the bottom of the triangle, think about power. At the top, you've got the big expensive brands. At the bottom are the big brands with lots of deep coffers. And at the bottom, you've got the garment worker paid the least. And so suddenly they were all out of work. I shouldn't say they were all, you can look into the figures, but, it affected something like half of them. So like almost 2 million garment workers affected by this stuff there. And so a campaign called Pay Up, which was started by a woman called Aisha Barenblatt and her organization Remake in the US, started to put pressure on brands. It was a social media thing. People used a hashtag on Instagram. You think that doesn't do anything? It really does. So 15,000 people last time I looked had signed this Change.org petition. Loads and loads of coverage in the news, loads of social media pushing, and brands started to say, oh, we look bad. We can't afford to look bad. And they started to pay. So now there's still a few who haven't. I won't name them right now because it is changing daily, but you can look it up if you want to check out on Remake Our World is the name of the organisation. But what this shows is that when we all get together and advocate for something different, we can change brands, we can change situations, especially when it's something like fashion, which is commercial, because these brands can only operate if we give them license to do so, if we give them our money. And if we don't, they can't. So actually, I feel like this is a good news story. It sounds like a hard one, and it is hard. It's a hard subject. But it's also a good news story. It just proves that if we get together and we really believe in something and we act in concert, so you can't do it on your own, then we can change stuff. And I think, we need to talk about the ocean, but when we come to environment and to oceans, it's the same story. If we join movements and use our passion and our contacts and our skills to move these conversations towards where we want them to head, we can actually change it.
That's right. And I feel like a really good point you mentioned was that we do have the power to choose and to tell these brands and basically everything that we do consume, because we are consumers and we have the majority all over the world that it goes with everything. Fast fashion, it goes with anything related to the environment or the ocean, anything that you purchase, you are voting with your wallet, and that is such a huge responsibility, and it's also a way we can make change.
And it's funny because I think people often feel like they don't have power, and on your own you don't, let's face it. I mean, when you're faced with big rich brands or governments that don't seem to be listening, it feels like you're just one person, you can't change things. But once you get together, you absolutely can. And these things have a snowball effect. And I love the idea that actually it sounds so cliched, but it does work. Vote with your wallet. If you don't buy things wrapped in plastic, eventually, if not enough people buy them, they won't be wrapped in plastic anymore. Now, it's not always that simple, is it? Because sometimes there's no choice. But I do think that just keeping that in mind, that your behaviour matters, you're part of this. And whatever it is that you're passionate about, the choices you make have a direct impact on that.
That's right. That's so right.
Mm.
What do you feel personally has been your biggest achievement through your journey of advocacy, basically?
Well, I saw that question. I don't really see it like that. I mean, I don't spend a lot of time wondering whether I've been effective, to be honest. I'm just too busy doing it. But I do notice the change that has happened while I've been part of this movement. And I do feel proud about being part of a movement that has seen change. And I think the most effective that I can be as an advocate or a change maker is by using my skills. So the skill that I have is talking and writing. I'm a journalist and I trained as that. So for me, if I can use my words and I can use the platforms that I've built to change conversations, then that is effective and that's exciting. And you do see it, I'm proud of the podcast. I feel like when people write to me or message me, or they comment on the guests that we've had and they say they've learned something, then that's amazing. Like that's the bit that gets me excited. But I don't really think it's me. I feel like I'm the conduit because I bring a lot of people into this conversation, and I'm not really the expert either. I'm the one, I mean, perhaps I've become an expert on sustainable fashion, but often when I'm doing these interviews, I'm talking to a climate scientist or a marine biologist or someone who's invented a new fabric. And so they're the experts, and I'm kind of bringing those conversations to people.
I feel it's a really important thing that you, to anyone listening really, no, to everybody listening, what am I saying? That you almost find what you feel like you're best at and you pursue that all the way. And
everyone's good at something, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So I think, I feel like when we look at activism, some people are just brilliant at getting meetings and bringing people together, and other people are really brilliant at graphic design and being able to put a message into a visual, or, everyone's got their own, I don't know. I think we just need to find our skills and apply them. It's easy to say that. I'm quite old, like I'm twice as old as you. So I feel like it takes some time to figure it out. And it's okay if it's not obvious at the beginning. Like, you figure it out, you make mistakes, and I've done lots of different things in my career, all the same kind of area, but it's only after a long time of making mistakes that you figure out what is the best route to follow, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I have a question that popped in my head, actually, because we were talking before about you can technically vote with your wallet. But I think another thing that sometimes...
Well, if you've got some money, you can.
Yeah, if you have the money, exactly.
Let's remember that.
Actually, is that a lot of ethical fashion businesses, usually their prices are quite high. Maybe that's because they classify themselves as a designer brand, or maybe it's because they want to pay their workers fairly, which is totally fair. But when it comes to the people who simply can't afford those ethical fashion products and feel the need to buy into the fast fashion industry because that's the only choice they have, I guess what advice would you give them?
Yeah, look, and we have to I started off talking about empathy. We need to remember to be empathetic, that it's a privilege to be able to make certain financial choices and be that vote with your wallet person. I get that. However, I would ask everyone to question their motivation. So, are you really buying that Fashion Nova boob tube because you have no money and couldn't afford to buy a better one? Or are you buying 4 Fashion Nova boob tubes because they're cheap and cheerful and you want to feel better, and you're buying volume at cheapness? Because that's actually something people do. They say, oh, I can't afford this, and yet they go out every Saturday and buy stuff. But they buy a volume of cheap stuff because the system has told them that that's how they stay on trend, or that's how they feel like they fit in, or it's enjoyable, or it's retail therapy, or whatever it is. So I'm not judging, but I'm asking you to look into your motivations. And really, if you can only afford what you need and you're buying those things that you need, then I'm not going to tell you off. But I would love people to just think a little bit more about their purchases and look at alternatives. So that can be super enjoyable too. I mean, I buy loads and loads of vintage things, and I like to thrift, and I always did. Now it's a hip thing. Everyone wants to be a thrifter. But I've been like this for 20 years because I like to get stuff people don't have. So, I mean, if you can see my office, which is my wardrobe, all these things are old things. I buy, like these curtains came from a market in Sydney called Rosa Markets, and they're like 1950s curtains. I like old things. So I think there's a lot of different routes you can go to shop more sustainably, and it isn't always about refusing to buy mass fashion, shall we say, but you can also make better fabric choices in those areas too. So if you have to buy from cheap shops, there are different kinds of levels of what you can buy. Look for something that's going to last. Look for something a bit more classic. Don't buy something that you literally know you're going to wear once and chuck it out. Even like, think about, I'm always thinking, this always sticks in my head when I see it. People who go to fancy dress parties and buy like a polyester sequin shedding $2 weird plastic item to wear once because that's what you're meant to do. Why? I just think there's loads of alternatives. We could make things, we could customize things, we could borrow things, we could swap things, and actually that can be really fun as well. So good question. I think really try not to judge, but also, I mean, if this is happening in your life with friends or with people you know, but it can be super fun to look at alternatives that are less damaging on the planet.
Yeah. I feel like it actually feels better, like talking amongst your friends, and if you are going to that party or whatever, think about the creative thing. Maybe it's like wrapping a scarf around your belt, as that could be that shimmery thing, or yeah, no, it's fun.
I think it's down to our convenient culture. We're just used to buying stuff and chucking it out, and coming back to that whole idea of one garbage truck full of textiles. It's not just fashion, but being dumped into landfill every second. We're just wasting far too much stuff.
Yes.
Across the board.
Yes. And it's having a massive impact on everybody around us and everything around us. And yeah, I did want to ask a question. Why do you believe there is such a disconnect between the fashion industry and the ocean?
Yeah, I mean, it's because it's not obvious. If I asked you before, I said how many people think about viscose as having come from trees and making fabric that way. So I think with water, it's not obvious to people how that's directly related to fashion. And when I first found out about microfiber pollution, I was so shocked. We had no idea. The person who broke the story, he's a scientist, the person who published some of the first research into microfibers forming ocean pollution, is a guy in Sydney called Dr. Mark Brown. He only published that first research paper in 2011. People just did not know. So the relation between our polyester clothes, synthetic clothing, and all the little fibers that can come off, not just in the wash, but just in use and then end up in the ocean. That's a new story. But before we get onto that, the water connection, what don't we know, maybe, not why don't we know? When you make textiles, there's something called wet processing. That's just like the kind of phrase that we would use to talk about how we treat and dye fibers and fabrics in order to make them into the lovely textiles we like. So dyeing is the obvious one. You know, everyone can imagine that. And perhaps people have seen those pictures. Greenpeace published them 10. They released this report called Detox My Fashion, which was all about the chemicals that are used in fabric production. And there are these pictures of rivers that were blue outside of denim production facilities in particular. So you imagine your jeans are blue, they're using all these blue dyes, and they're literally going right out into the rivers outside the factories. Things are getting a bit better with that, but I think people can think of that, they can imagine it. But there's lots of other chemicals and processes that don't look coloured or don't show you obviously their origins by looking in the rivers. So, you know, huge amounts of chemicals are used in finishing to make things soft, to make them water repellent, to make them perform in different ways, have a different sheen, have a different hand feel. I was once told a story by the guy who started Patagonia. Should I tell you the story? It's crazy.
Yes.
He'd opened a new shop. I've forgotten where it was, but a new shop in America. And it was a brand new building and they were all excited. And then after a few days, everyone was getting headaches. And he said, "This is a sick building. What's wrong with it? Why is everyone, oh dear, there's a problem." So he sent everyone home and they called in a structural engineer or a building engineer and said, "What's wrong with this building? My staff are getting sick. They've got headaches and they're not feeling well." And then after a bit of investigation, they found out that it wasn't the building that was sick. It was all of the chemical off-gassing coming from his new garments that are brand new, that had been stored in the basement, coming up through the air conditioning vents. People were breathing it in. And it's because they put things like formaldehyde onto garments in order to stop them getting moldy when they ship them. He didn't even know. I mean, he hadn't requested that they did that. Or his team who do sourcing hadn't said, "Please make sure that you drench these clothes in these horrible chemicals." It's just the processing. And so I think I always hate that story because it shows how, you know, people just, unless you ask the right questions, you're in the dark. So yeah, that's the chemical side of it. I wrote down some stats because I never remember them. Here they are. So according to the World Bank, 20% or up to 20% of all industrial water pollution is caused by the textiles industry. And then these are ones I do remember. So this isn't polluting, it's just how much water we use. Up to 2,700 litres of water could be used in producing one t-shirt. So that's growing the cotton, dyeing it, all the rest of it. So the connections with water are really strong. But I think, again, the ocean one feels even less related. Like people go, well, what do you mean? Like, why is it related? But you got to remember the ocean's downhill from everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think going back to microfibers, so last year I actually did this Stop Microfibers campaign just within my school, and we decided that we would call 10 different fast fashion businesses, and we would ask them how many items of polyester clothing do they have.
Wow.
Because, we just thought we wanted to know, because as you said, it's really recent information and there actually isn't that much stats on it. So we thought to ourselves, maybe we could try and see if we could get some stats by asking how many polyester clothing do they have in the first place. And we called up about 10 different businesses and all of them could not tell us. They did not know how many polyester clothing they had because to them that's not something that they looked at. And I guess, how do you think we can combat microfibers when they don't even know what they're exactly doing wrong in the first place either?
It's so hard. You've pointed out the biggest problem, which is we don't have the research. And most brands really haven't even started to look into this as an issue. But also, even if they do start to do that, the solutions are not obvious. We don't know what they are. So I mentioned this guy called Mark Brown. There are other scientists obviously looking into this, but he's just someone in Sydney. And as I said, one of the earliest people to publish findings around what was happening with this. And what he did was him and his team had tested sand outside of wastewater pipes that was basically shoreline stuff that was entering into the ocean, which was grey water, so just coming from washing machines, right? So domestic washing machines, and then found a high density of these plastic microfibers there polluting. We should probably talk about what they are. So a microfiber is a fiber of less than 5 millimeters thick, so they're tiny. You can't, finer than a human hair. I'm sure you've seen, and you can look it up, pictures through a microscope where you see them.
Yes.
But actually, if you're swimming around in the ocean, you can't see these fibers. There's a lot of publicity on ocean plastic. And we talk about microplastics where big pieces of plastic break up.
Yes.
So you see that. You can see the fragments of the plastic in the ocean. You can even see it on the sand, can't you? Have you ever looked on the sand? You see little bits and you don't know what they used to be, but you can see, you can visualize, is this bits of an old bottle top, or, sometimes you see bottle tops too. But fibers is different. They're very, very hard to see. And they're so fine that they can bioaccumulate, or they can be absorbed into organisms and marine life. I said bioaccumulate because that's what we mean by that, is that the toxins bioaccumulate the further up the food chain you get. So if a fish is eating these things, what happens? If you eat fish, you're at the top of the food chain. So you've had the bite. Yeah, it's terrible. So you ask, what can brands do? At the moment, it's difficult. I'm glad I don't run a brand. I don't know what they can do. And Mark Brown doesn't know what they can do. We don't know yet. What he thinks, however, is that, and he is in the process right now of doing more and more research on this, and he works for the University of New South Wales, and they have a big grant to look into this, that retrofitting washing machines is probably one of the best ways to go, and making sure that it's regulated that all new washing machines have to be fitted with filters, and these filters would take these fibers out of the system before they ever went into the waterways. I mentioned to you that 70% of clothes are made from synthetics, so that's on average, we think. If you ask a brand, what are they going to do about it? One of the things they could do is switch to natural fibers, but that's going to be more expensive. And also, it's not always practical, so think about why you want polyester. Why do you think that would be?
Some cottons and stuff, I don't think, like specifically sportswear.
Yeah.
I don't think it's very breathable or very you know, practical for that use. So
absolutely, it's performance.
Yeah,
exactly. So would you like to wear a pair of swim shorts or a swimsuit or a bikini that has no stretch?
probably not.
Or that doesn't dry quickly? Or, you know, or do you want to play sport in something that doesn't moisture wick or doesn't have any stretch? Performance is one of the things that drives the use of polyester. It's not just that it's cheap, although it is cheap. Polyester, in case people don't know, is derived from petroleum. So it's a fossil fuel.
Yeah.
It's plastic. I mean, that's also something people don't know. People go, what do you mean it's not plastic? Plastic is a water bottle, but clothes are plastic. So what happens is polyester, acrylic, nylon, these materials are used to make our clothes. And when we use them and when we wash them, tiny fragments and tiny fibers come off and enter the water table. So yeah, the question around what we can do is complicated. The answer is we need more research. We then need to regulate, and potentially the solution around washing machine filters could be a good one. At the moment, people are talking about, for example, they call it, the brand name is Guppy Bag.
Yes.
But you can buy a bag which will capture the fibers in the washing machine. And so you put your stuff in, drawstring the bag up, wash it, and then afterwards you can see the plastic fibers collected in the thing like lint. Mm-hmm. Now, I asked Mark Brown about this the other day, or a couple of months ago, and said, is this a good solution? And he said, no, I'm not sanctioning that because we haven't got proper testing on it. And where do you put the fibers? And how can you be sure that they don't escape when you're taking them out? And does the bag itself shed fibers?
Yeah.
So it's really hard. It's a really hard one. What would I say? There is interesting research at the beginning. There's research being done now around whether or not different weaves could reduce shedding. So I keep talking about this one scientist. There are other scientists doing this work, but he's just the one I know. So this guy, Mark Brown, his original piece of research involved looking at a polar's fleece. You know what they look like, so, sort of shaggy, and then like a classic business shirt, and looking at how they shed differently. And of course, a polar fleece sheds more. Or if you've ever held up a fake fur coat, you can blow on it and watch them blow away, right? So shaggy things shed more readily than certain kinds of weaves. So maybe the industry could produce, maybe textile developers can produce weaves that shed less. So that's one of the kind of areas that people are looking at. There's also some research that came out of the University of Leeds, I think it was last year, that suggests that if we wash on lower temperatures, we can reduce the shedding. So if you're worried about it, you could take that advice and maybe it will help.
Yeah.
Possible.
Yeah, and do you think government policy should come into play with this as a way to regulate the fast fashion industry and its environmental impacts on our oceans and on our land as well?
Yeah, I do. I think we need stronger regulation. The fact is that in certain countries, regulation is stronger than others. And because of the system and because of capitalism, if you want to go there, brands will always look and producers will always look for the cheaper option. And the cheaper option is often in places where countries are less well regulated. So it's a very complicated topic, but we do, of course, need regulation.
And youth all around the world are rising to our world's greatest challenges. And as you're an advocate yourself, what's some advice that you give to them?
Yeah. I mean, what we need to do is find the love that will push us forwards to be better activists. So when we're talking about the ocean, you need to spend time in the ocean if you are living near it, if you can access it. You need to remind yourself why you love it. And if you don't live near it, you can still remind yourself why it's so important by looking at David Attenborough films and reading National Geographic and finding out. I was looking this morning about this wonderful story about deep sea creatures and how they were looking at how they'd got this new technology where they could see their skeletons. But I mean, natural history is fascinating. Looking at the creatures that make up our wonderful world is where you get the love for this stuff from, I think. And why would you not want to protect what you love? So I think it comes down to educate yourself, find your passion point. The ocean isn't, probably everyone listening to this is passionate about the oceans, but maybe that isn't your thing. Maybe you're more motivated around forests or animals, or you're more motivated around social justice and social enterprise, that's fine. Find your thing and then really dive in and educate yourself, immerse yourself in the good stories about all the things that make you love this thing so that you stay positive. And then I think you have to find your people. Like I said, you can't do it on your own. I think my last thing would be to say, keep that empathy, because you started off asking about this difficult time in the world. People are having a really hard time, and we have to really empathize with the fact that not everyone is where we are, and be kind and try and bring people along with positivity. And I think if you do that, those three things, which is find the thing that really gets you excited, join things and find your people, and then be empathetic about it.
Do it. My last question I'm stealing from Bailey Ritter. This is not my question. She has asked me this question before and I love it. Okay, if you had the world's attention for 30 seconds, what would you say?
Right now, I would give the mic to someone else. I would. I think that those of us who've had the mic for a long time, whether because we're old, whether because we're privileged, whether because we're white, whether because we, I don't know, have been the architects of some of these conversations, need to pass it down and across and around. So I would give it back to you guys and say it's time for the youth to take over. It's time for the next generation of voices and the next leaders to really take up more space. So that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you so much for watching that. I hope you all really enjoyed that. I know I personally did, and it was so inspiring listening to Claire, and Maha and I were just talking about it straight after, like, wow, that was so great. So I really hope you all got something from that.
That was a really interesting panel session. I really enjoyed that thoroughly. I just moved from my table to my couch. I'm going to stand up. It's been a long day so far. Who do we have next? I have to move my cat out of the way. I feel like I knew about polyester as part of being an issue in fast fashion, but I didn't really realize that. I don't remember, what was the thing that was made out of trees?
She said, I think she said viscose. So it's like a cellulose sort of fiber, and they strip that from trees or bamboo.
Yeah, I didn't know about that before. So I think we all kind of learned something new. I thought that was really awesome. And I'm really excited to listen to your podcast with Maha. I hope she has a happy birthday.
Yes.
Do you have any closing statements about any of this?
Look, the main thing is, I guess, one of the biggest things I took out of it is finding, it's more personal, I guess, finding what really resonates with you, and then just putting all your passion and everything that you can possibly put towards that. And if that makes you feel great, then that's what you should do, instead of focusing on the big picture, because sometimes we can get really caught up in that. But if you focus on what is inside you and your passions and what you're good at, then that's the only thing that you should be doing.
Absolutely. And kind of going off of that, we do have a question in our Q&A from Cody. Out of all of the different avenues in activism, what made you settle on trying to battle fast fashion? That kind of goes off of what you were just saying, is like, start small. Is that kind of a part of it as well?
It's definitely starting small, but I guess if you have the big picture in mind, then it's always the small steps that get you there. But in terms of Cody's question, it's so hard choosing between something when you're so passionate about really everything.
Yeah.
But I guess consumerism is kind of the thing I'm working on within World Oceans Day, and there's obviously food consumption and fashion consumption, and I couldn't really choose between any of them, so I decided to do both. But this specific fashion battle, I guess, as you said, it's such an issue that really hasn't been on the front line that much, and especially microfibers, as it is a massive, massive issue. And these microfibers we're talking about, you can see them under microscopes there, about the size of plankton. So it's a really pressing issue, and it's quite new, and I think it needs to be more readily discussed and communicated about. So I think that's one of the reasons that I'm trying to battle this fashion thing.
Yeah, definitely. And the plastics is obviously a huge part of that as well. I'm not sure if you have one in your possession. I don't currently, but do you use one of those like little microfiber balls when you do your laundry?
No, I don't have one either, unfortunately. But she, as as Claire did mention about the guppy bag, and how Mark Brown, who was the scientist, he doesn't fully, support that, because there isn't enough research there. So the research just isn't there to support one specific thing. But I guess, if it has shown in through a little research of it, then it's probably not a bad thing to use that sort of stuff if you have access. But no, I don't personally have access, no.
Yeah, definitely. I don't have laundry in my building. I have to go somewhere else to do it. And I always wish I had one, but like you said, the research just isn't there. But it is interesting. The nonprofit Five Gyres, they are currently doing some research trying to figure out if microfibers escaping from exhaust pipes at laundromats and wash places is affecting the local flora and fauna. So that is research that is happening. We just don't have it yet. But I think that was a really, really informative, awesome session. Definitely missed out on being able to interact with Claire and Mom in person, but I'm really happy we've been able to chat a little bit. Really good to talk to you, see you again. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I think that was all. Maha's really awesome. Unfortunately, she's not here today, but big shout out to Maha, and a really huge thank you to everybody, and Claire as well. It was really awesome to spend time talking to her, and thank you to World Oceans Day and the Youth-A-Thon and everyone on the panel across the Youth-A-Thon. Yeah, thank you so much, and keep fighting that good fight. Yeah.